Throughout human history, the shadow of the wolf has stalked our myths, our fears, and our imagination. The werewolf, a creature of both man and beast, has endured across continents and centuries, taking on new forms, yet always echoing the same primal truth: within us lies something wild. But where did this legend begin? What ancient whispers breathed life into the first tales of transformation? To understand the werewolf, we must first journey back to a time when stories were survival, and the line between man and monster was thin. The demonic beasts of Mesopotamia. Our trail begins in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. In the shadow of ziggurats and under the watchful eyes of ancient gods, early Sumerian and Akkadian myths hinted at beings that blurred the line between human and animal. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving literary works, the concept of transformation is introduced in symbolic form. When the goddess Ishtar is spurned by Gilgamesh, he recalls how she once turned a former lover into a wolf. This punishment was not simply physical, it was spiritual exile. To become a wolf was to be cast out, feared, and hunted. In Mesopotamian demonology, there existed malevolent spirits believed to possess men and drive them to animalistic behavior. These entities could take hold of a person's soul, forcing them into madness, into bloodlust. To the ancient mind, a man who killed without reason or who howled in the night might not be sick, he might be possessed. A proto-werewolf, condemned by something otherworldly. In these early stories, we see the foundations of the werewolf myth. Transformation as punishment, violence as a sign of possession, and the wilderness as a place of terror. Lycanthropy in ancient Greece, divine wrath and ritual from the deserts of Mesopotamia. The legend traveled west, to the olive groves and marble temples of ancient Greece. Here, the story takes a more structured shape. The Greeks had a name for it: lycanthropy, from lykos, meaning wolf, and anthropos, meaning man. The tale of Lycaon, king of Arcadia, is perhaps the most infamous. According to the Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, Lycaon dared to test Zeus himself by serving him a meal made from human flesh. Enraged by this barbarity, Zeus struck him down and transformed him into a wolf, a creature more fitting for his monstrous nature. This story is deeply symbolic. The transformation isn't just a curse, it is poetic justice. The beast within is made visible. In this view, lycanthropy is divine retribution, a theme that will echo throughout the legend's history. But the Greeks didn't stop there. In Arcadia, there were whispered rumors of rituals tied to Zeus Lycaeus, where young men may have eaten parts of a sacrificial victim to gain strength or invoke change. Some believed that partaking in such rites risked transformation, temporary or permanent, into a wolf. Were these tales metaphorical, or were they cautionary stories built around ancient rites? Regardless, they reveal a key psychological thread: fear of the self, fear of becoming, and the belief that beneath civility lies a potential for savagery. Roman influence, wolves of war. As the Greek world faded into the Roman Empire, the legend evolved once more. To the Romans, the wolf was not just a symbol of fear, but of power. Rome's founding myth is drenched in lupine imagery. Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf, gave birth to the very empire that would rule the known world. Wolves were sacred to Mars, the god of war. They represented ferocity, loyalty, and conquest. Yet the idea of man turning into wolf never vanished. Roman historians like Petronius and Pliny the Elder wrote of soldiers or outcasts who took on animalistic characteristics, some even transforming entirely under the full moon, an image that would later become iconic. The Roman werewolf, unlike the cursed Greek or the demonic Mesopotamian, was sometimes portrayed as a warrior, a force of nature, terrifying but not necessarily evil. He was the embodiment of martial fury, an avatar of the battlefield's chaos. Still, at its core, the idea remained consistent. The human soul, when unbound from law or reason, might revert, might become. Across these ancient civilizations, a key pattern emerges. The werewolf is not merely a monster, it is a reflection, a warning. In Mesopotamia, It is possession. In Greece, divine punishment. In Rome, raw power. But in all cases, it speaks to a psychological truth humanity has long feared to confront, that the greatest monsters may not come from the wild, they may come from within. As the ancient world gave way to the medieval, the myths that once resided in marble halls and on clay tablets began to take root in shadowy forests and among whispering villagers. The werewolf, once a symbol of divine wrath or martial ferocity, began to change shape. It became closer to the people and more terrifying for it. This transformation marked a turning point. The werewolf was no longer just a figure of myth, but a living fear passed down in hushed voices, no longer distant. Gods are noble kings, but farmers, neighbors, and strangers could become wolves. The boundary between man and monster thinned, and something else was rising. Something that would forever change the nature of the legend. From divine punishment to primal fear, the shift from ancient mythology to folklore wasn't just a cultural evolution, it was psychological. In earlier eras, werewolves were the result of supernatural punishment or the workings of the gods. But in a world now filled with superstition, famine, plague, and war, people needed explanations for the horrors they couldn't understand. They no longer feared the wrath of Zeus. They feared the woods at night. They feared what starvation and madness could do to the mind. They feared what man could do when stripped of law and comfort, and so the werewolf evolved. It became less a metaphor for divine justice and more a cautionary tale, one rooted in survival. If someone in the village committed an unthinkable act, murder, cannibalism, savagery, it was easier to believe they were cursed, transformed, not truly human. In these tales, the werewolf became a scapegoat, a symbol for the chaos that lived just beyond the firelight. The church's shadow, werewolves and the devil enter Christianity. As the church spread across Europe, it brought with it a new spiritual framework. Pagan beliefs were not erased but twisted, woven into Christian theology as symbols of sin, heresy, and demonic influence. The werewolf, once a symbol of wrath or wilderness, was now viewed through a theological lens as a servant of Satan. By the Middle Ages, stories circulated of men who made pacts with the devil to gain the ability to transform. The full moon, once tied to lunar cycles and ancient rites, was now seen as a sign of dark magic. Silver, often used in religious rites, and symbols of purity became the only metal that could harm such a creature. This religious reinterpretation had deep psychological implications. The werewolf was no longer a tragic figure or a cursed soul, it was evil incarnate. And just as witches were hunted for their perceived allegiance with darkness, so too were werewolves. In some regions, the two were indistinguishable, but the truth was often far more tragic than supernatural. Werewolves and the unknown. Illness, madness, and the mind, as medical science was virtually non-existent. Conditions like rabies, schizophrenia, and clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a person believes they can or have turned into a wolf, were misunderstood. Imagine it, a man in a village raving at the moon, foaming at the mouth, attacking livestock. With no knowledge of infection or mental illness, what conclusion would they reach? He must be a werewolf. And so these tales became explanations, a way to process the unknown. They offered closure in a world that had none. But these stories did more than comfort. They warned. They taught. They enforced a dangerous kind of order. The tale as tool, control through folklore. In many ways, the werewolf myth was a form of social regulation, a tale to keep people in line. In times of famine, those who stole food might be accused of being werewolves. In periods of unrest, those who questioned authority could be branded as cursed or possessed. And in a deeply religious society, where sin was equated with spiritual danger, the myth became weaponized. To become a werewolf was to become other, to become something that could and should be destroyed. These stories didn't just reflect fear, they reinforced it. But even in these dark and oppressive tales, a deeper psychological truth remained. The werewolf was not merely a monster in the forest. It was the forest within us. It was the rage we hide, the instincts we suppress, the part of us that fears losing control. As the myth spread and morphed, it was not just carried by storytellers, it was carved into the collective unconscious. Across every culture it touched, it asked the same question: what happens when the human mask slips? By the time Europe descended into the chaos and fear of the Middle Ages, the werewolf legend was no longer just a whispered superstition. It was now a cultural phenomenon, a legal matter, a weapon of control, suspicion, and punishment. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, the werewolf stepped fully into the realm of reality, or what people believed to be real. It was no longer just a story meant to frighten children. It was a crime, and Europe began to hunt. The werewolf trials. Real men, real accusations. We often think of witch trials as the hallmark of medieval hysteria, but hidden within the same historical archives are cases of werewolf trials, grim, brutal events that mirrored the persecution of witches. In regions like France, Switzerland, and parts of Germany, individuals, mostly men, were accused of transforming into wolves and attacking livestock, children, and even entire villages. These accusations were treated seriously, sometimes even with more fear than those leveled at witches. After all, witches used magic, werewolves used their teeth. In 1521, in Poligny, France, 2 men, Pierre Burgot and Michel Verdun, were tried and executed for being werewolves. Under torture, they confessed to having made a pact with the devil, receiving an ointment that allowed them to change form. The trial records describe grotesque crimes, of stalking the forests, of tearing flesh, with claws and fangs. Were these confessions real or coerced? The lines blur, as they always do when fear governs law. But perhaps the most infamous of all was the case of Gilles Garnier, known as the Werewolf of Dole. In 1573, during a brutal winter, children began to disappear. Their remains were found savaged, torn apart. Garnier, a hermit living on the outskirts of town, was caught with flesh he could not explain. He confessed to being a werewolf, again, likely under duress, and was burned alive. These were not isolated cases. They were part of a larger pattern, one that spoke volumes about the collective psyche of the time. Fear in the flesh. Why the trials happened, so why were people so ready to believe that their neighbors could transform into beasts? Part of it lies in the terror of the era. The Black Death had ravaged Europe. Famine, war, and political instability left the continent reeling. Fear needed a face, and the wolf, already feared and misunderstood, was the perfect vessel. But the werewolf was also uniquely human. Unlike dragons or demons, it could walk among you. It looked like a man until it didn't. This uncertainty bred paranoia. In a world with no psychological science, behaviors we now recognize as mental illness, trauma, or even neurodivergence were seen as signs of the monstrous. A man who wandered the woods at night, a child who spoke to animals, a woman with healing herbs. Better safe than sorry. Werewolves in art and literature. These fears weren't confined to courtrooms. They found expression in the art and literature of the age. Medieval manuscripts are filled with images of wolves and hybrid beasts. In some illustrations, the werewolf is depicted as a monstrous, hulking figure, part man, part wolf. In others, he is more subtle, a man with wolfish features hidden among the crowd. It's telling that many of these depictions blur the line between wolf, demon, and criminal, reflecting the era's fear that evil could hide in plain sight. One of the most fascinating pieces of literature from this period is the 12th century French lie, Bisclaveret, by Marie de France. In it, a nobleman secretly turns into a wolf for several days each month. His wife, upon discovering his secret, betrays him, leaving him stranded in wolf form. Eventually, the king adopts him as a loyal animal, and his humanity is revealed through his noble behavior even in beast form. It's a rare sympathetic take, a tale that suggests that the wolf within us might still be noble. That transformation doesn't always mean damnation. A tool of suppression, controlling the margins. There's a darker side to these stories too. Just as witch hunts disproportionately targeted women, especially the elderly, widowed, or socially defiant, werewolf accusations were often aimed at the marginalized, hermits, vagabonds, those who didn't fit in. Accusing someone of being a werewolf was a way to explain what was not understood. and to eliminate what was not accepted. It's no coincidence that many accused werewolf cases involved the poor, the mentally ill, or the socially isolated. To be different was to be dangerous, and to be dangerous was to be hunted. The werewolf myth was no longer just about wolves. It was about conformity, about control, about the deep-rooted fear of the outsider. And so, the werewolf walked not just in forests, but through the very fabric of medieval life. It lived in courtrooms, in paintings, in whispered rumors passed from town to town. It was the stranger, the sinner, the savage, the scapegoat. But above all, it was us, our fears, projected into flesh. And as the centuries passed, the myth didn't die. It evolved. As the medieval world gave way to the Enlightenment, and reason began to challenge superstition, the werewolf might have faded into the shadows of forgotten myths. But it didn't. Instead, it adapted. It evolved once more, taking on new meanings, new forms, and embedding itself deeper into the imagination of the modern world. The werewolf's survival wasn't an accident. It reflected something fundamental about the human psyche, something that science, reason, and progress could not erase. The werewolf awakens, literature breathes new life. In the 19th century, as Gothic literature rose to prominence, monsters were reborn, not as objects of religious fear, but as metaphors for human nature itself. The werewolf, with its dual existence, fit perfectly into this new narrative landscape. One of the earliest literary treatments of lycanthropy in the modern era was The Wolf Leader, 1857, by Alexandre Dumas, a tale that blends folklore with psychological horror. Later, in 1933, Guy Endor's novel The Werewolf of Paris would cement the werewolf's place in modern horror fiction, often described as the werewolf equivalent of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Here, the werewolf was no longer a tool of medieval control or a simplistic agent of evil. It was a tragic figure, torn between its humanity and its primal instincts, a symbol of duality, of repression, of the beast inside the civilized man. The werewolf was not just a monster, it was us. Hollywood's Howl, the silver screen transformation. When the 20th century arrived, the werewolf found a new home: the movies. In 1941, Universal Pictures released The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr., a film that would forever define the cinematic werewolf mythos. The film introduced elements now considered canon: the bite that passes the curse, the vulnerability to silver, and the inevitable tragedy of transformation. Larry Talbot, the film's protagonist, is not evil. He is cursed, a good man doomed to become a killer, despite his will. His story is not one of villainy, but of loss. Loss of control, loss of identity, loss of humanity. The success of The Wolfman ensured that the werewolf would not disappear from popular culture. Instead, it evolved alongside the anxieties of each era. During the Cold War, werewolf films often mirrored fears of infiltration and internal corruption. In the 1970s and 1980s, with the rise of body horror, films like An American Werewolf in London and The Howling explored the terrifying physicality of transformation, the pain, the grotesqueness, the unstoppable change. Transformation scenes became set pieces of horror, emphasizing the idea that the monster wasn't just lurking within, it was tearing its way out. Themes of transformation and duality throughout these interpretations. One theme remains consistent: duality. The werewolf represents the conflict between our polished social selves and the wild primal instincts buried deep within us. In psychoanalytic terms, it speaks to Freud's idea of the id, the part of the psyche driven by primal urges and desires. No matter how advanced or civilized we become, that ancient part of us remains. The full moon, shining its cold light, acts as the trigger, a reminder that under the right conditions, stress, rage, desperation, anyone could lose control. Modern adaptations have expanded on this theme. In some stories, the transformation is a metaphor for addiction, in others for puberty, sexual awakening, or mental illness. The werewolf is a canvas onto which society projects its changing fears. And that ability to transform, not just physically, but symbolically, is why the werewolf endures. Contemporary takes. The werewolf. Reimagined in recent decades, the werewolf has continued to evolve, adapting to contemporary storytelling. In the Twilight Saga, werewolves are protectors, muscular, noble, and heroic. In Harry Potter, Professor Lupin's lycanthropy is a metaphor for chronic illness and social stigma. Television series like Teen Wolf reframe the myth for younger audiences, using the werewolf curse as a metaphor for adolescence, change, and self-discovery. In shows like The Originals and Penny Dreadful, the werewolf becomes a tragic anti-hero, battling inner demons while protecting those they love. Even video games like the Witcher series feature werewolves as tragic monsters, often cursed souls seeking redemption rather than blood. Across these stories, the werewolf is less a villain and more a complex character, tragic, sympathetic, deeply human. Despite the changes in setting, in appearance, and even in tone, the core remains the same. The werewolf is still about the human struggle between civility and savagery, between self-control and surrender, between who we are and who we fear we might become. It is a legend that, like the full moon, rises again and again, reshaping itself to fit the fears and hopes of each new generation. And as long as we wrestle with the wildness inside us, the werewolf will never truly disappear. From the shadows of Mesopotamian temples to the blood-soaked courtrooms of medieval Europe, from howling through moonlit forests to flickering across cinema screens, the werewolf has endured, and not just endured, but evolved, transformed, and returned with every generation, each time wearing a slightly different face. The question then is why? Why has this myth followed us for millennia? The primal symbol, fear, desire, and the wild. Within, the answer lies not in the werewolf itself, but in what it represents. At its core, the werewolf is not just a creature, it's a mirror, a reflection of the most ancient parts of ourselves, the parts we suppress, the parts we fear. In psychology, this concept finds expression in Carl Jung's theory of the shadow self, the hidden, repressed aspects of our personality that we bury beneath the surface. Rage, lust, jealousy, violence, traits that society has deemed unacceptable. The werewolf, in its fury and ferocity, gives that shadow a face. It is what happens when the mask slips, when the boundaries of control erode, when the civilized mind is overtaken by instinct. This is why the transformation is often painful, jarring, horrific, because it's not just about becoming a wolf, it's about losing oneself. But paradoxically, the werewolf is also liberating. It taps into a deep, often unspoken desire to shed the expectations of the modern world, to run wild, to feel powerful, to be unburdened by rules, by reason, by restraint. The werewolf is fear, but also freedom. Adaptability, a myth that evolves with us. Few myths have demonstrated the adaptability of the werewolf. Where vampires seduce and ghosts haunt, the werewolf reinvents. In times of war, it becomes the enemy within. In times of social upheaval, it becomes the scapegoat. In modern psychology, it becomes a metaphor for trauma, repression, even identity. And unlike many monsters, the werewolf can be both, villain and victim, sometimes within the same story. That complexity makes it uniquely human. Whether as a cautionary tale or a symbol of self-discovery, the werewolf endures because it changes as we change. The modern mind and the ancient beast today, we live in a world ruled by algorithms, logic, and precision. We are connected, watched, tracked, and optimized. Yet the werewolf remains not as a relic, but as a reminder that beneath the polish of civilization, we are still animals. We still feel rage. We still fear losing control. We still yearn for transformation, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. The werewolf whispers to us because it speaks in a language older than words. It howls in the spaces between order and chaos, between conformity and rebellion, between who we are and who we could become if the leash ever snapped. And so the legend lives on, in films, in books, in whispered stories around the fire, in dreams of wildness, in fears of what lies beneath our skin. The werewolf is more than a monster. It is a symbol of all that we bury, all that we fight, and all that we might one day embrace. Because the truth is, we are all a little bit wolf. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below, and if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness. His name was Daniel, a 34-year-old auto mechanic from a quiet Pennsylvania town nestled at the edge of dense woodland. When I first spoke with him, he was hesitant, guarded. His voice was rough, not just from years of inhaling garage fumes and cigarette smoke, but from carrying something that clawed at his mind long after the wounds had healed. It started with a hunting trip, he told me. 3 years ago, Daniel and his older brother, Rob, had ventured deep into Black Hollow Forest for a weekend of camping and hunting. They'd been going there since they were kids, a tradition passed down from their father. But this trip, he said, felt different from the moment they arrived. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just this oppressive stillness, like the whole place was holding its breath. On the second night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and shadows swallowed the campfire glow, something stirred in the dark. At first, it was just a low growl, too deep to be a wolf, too long to be a bear. Then the sound of twigs snapping, heavy, deliberate footsteps. Rob grabbed his rifle. Daniel grabbed a flashlight. They weren't afraid of animals. But what came next wasn't anything that should have existed in those woods. We saw eyes, yellow glowing eyes about 7 feet up, staring back at us from the tree line. And then the thing stepped forward. Daniel's hand trembled as he recalled it. A massive creature, humanoid in shape but covered in coarse black fur. Its snout twitched as it sniffed the air. Muscles rippled under its hide. Long claws curled from its fingers. It didn't charge. It didn't growl. It just stared. Bob raised his rifle and fired. The creature vanished in a blur, and a split second later Rob was gone, thrown into the trees like a rag doll. Daniel ran. He didn't look back. What followed was a blur, hours lost to panic, stumbling through the forest, until he collapsed near a ravine, and that's when the pain started. Every nerve lit on fire, he said. My spine arched like it was trying to snap in half. My fingers broke and twisted. My teeth felt like they were being pulled out, then pushed back in, sharper. Daniel lay there under the full moon, screaming, convulsing, bones reshaping in real time. His skin tore and healed as fur pushed through. He remembers the moment his vision sharpened, when he could hear mice rustling under the snow a mile away. He remembers hunger, raw and mindless. And then, nothing. He woke the next day naked, covered in mud, blood, and scratches. His throat ached from howling. His hands, human again, were torn, nails cracked and thick with grime. There was no sign of Rob. The authorities chalked it up to a bear attack. They found some blood, some broken branches, but no body. Daniel didn't argue. He couldn't. Who would believe him? But Daniel knows. He knows what he felt, what he became. And worst of all, he knows he's not alone. There's a primal fear that dwells deep in the human psyche, a fear that predates civilization, rooted in the rustling of leaves at night, in the glow of eyes that blink from the woods, in the howling that breaks the silence under a swollen moon. Werewolves. They have haunted our folklore for centuries, creatures of myth, cursed souls that shed their humanity when the moon is full and the blood boils hot. From the dark forests of medieval Europe to the remote mountain towns of America, stories of men and women shifting into beasts have endured, dismissed by many as mere legend, but for some, it is a terrifying truth they've lived through. Tonight, I'm not here to entertain fantasy. I'm here to share the voices of those who claim to have seen, to have endured, to have become something inhuman. These are not tales plucked from fiction, but testimonies collected from people who once lived ordinary lives until they crossed paths with the impossible. Their stories are not easily told. Some are whispered with trembling voices, others scribbled in notebooks like warnings to whoever finds them. But all of them, every single one, has left an indelible scar on those who lived it. In these confessions, you'll hear the torment of transformation, the fear of losing control, and the lingering trauma that no amount of daylight can erase. This is not a documentary. This is not a cautionary tale. This is a descent into terror, into truth, into the werewolf within. If you're brave enough, stay with me, for the first voice you'll hear belongs to a man who watched it happen, watched himself disappear into fur, fang, and fury, and when he returned, he was no longer certain who he was. Daniel didn't return to the forest. Not for the search, not for closure. Something inside him had changed. Something primal, hungry, and impossible to ignore. He moved to a smaller town hours away from Black Hollow, found work at a local shop, and tried to bury the past. But the curse doesn't stay buried. It always starts a few days before the full moon, Daniel explained. A buzzing in my spine, restlessness. I get these flashes, not memories, more like glimpses. Trees, teeth, blood, then comes the pain. He learned to track the lunar cycle obsessively, marking calendars, locking himself inside reinforced basements with chains and tranquilizers. But the transformations always found a way through. The chains snapped, the drugs wore off, doors buckled. Sometimes he woke in the forest, sometimes in strangers' barns, and always, always alone. I started noticing things when I woke up, he told me. Shredded clothes, dirt under my nails, the taste of something metallic in my mouth. He stopped eating meat. It triggered something inside him, a gnawing craving that scared him more than the transformations themselves. Living with the curse wasn't just painful, it was isolating. Daniel pushed people away. Friends stopped calling. His girlfriend left after finding him curled up in the bathtub covered in scratches he couldn't explain. The local doctor diagnosed him with seizures and prescribed sedatives. He flushed them. "They don't fix what I am," he muttered. There was no diagnosis for a curse. He joined online forums, deep in the corners of the web. Paranormal groups, cryptid hunters, Reddit threads filled with whispers and warnings. Most were jokes, trolls, keyboard skeptics, but one night someone messaged him directly. "You're not the only one." They called themselves Greytooth, said they'd been living with the curse for over a decade, told him about other shifters who managed to keep it under control, that there were ways, rituals, herbs, and mental exercises to hold on to your mind, even as your body changed. It was the first hope Daniel had felt since Rob disappeared. "I still don't know if Greytooth was real," Daniel admitted, "but they gave me a list. Names, stories, people who'd been through this before. People like me." He started reaching out, quiet phone calls in the middle of the night, whispered confessions from strangers in the Midwest, the Rockies, even Europe. Every story was different, but the fear was the same. The fear of the moon, the fear of hurting someone, and worse, the fear of never returning to yourself. For Daniel, the transformation was no longer just a monthly torment. It became a mirror, a brutal, unforgiving reflection of his deepest fears, his rage, his guilt. The werewolf wasn't just a monster that clawed out of him. It was him, a version he didn't want to acknowledge, let alone accept. "I used to think I was cursed," he said. "Now I think maybe it's just what was always inside me, waiting." He wasn't alone in that revelation. One of the voices Daniel connected with was a woman named Harper, a former paramedic from Colorado who'd experienced her first shift after a car accident in a remote area of the Rockies. Trapped overnight with 2 passengers dying in the snow, she'd blacked out. When she awoke, there was blood everywhere, but the bodies were untouched. "They said I was in shock," she told Daniel in one of their late-night calls. "But I remember it, the way my fingers cracked, the way the snow melted beneath my body heat, and the way the wind stopped, like even nature didn't want to be near me." Harper had chosen to embrace her transformations, not to fight them. She'd moved into the wilderness far from towns, living alone with her dogs and her journals. "I call it the hunt," she said. "I don't hurt people. I run. I leap. I feel. It's the only time I don't feel numb." Her perspective shook. Daniel, he'd spent so long hating what he'd become, fearing the beast within. But here was someone who had found not peace but purpose in it. So he started documenting everything. He wrote down every memory of every shift, the sounds, the smells, the tastes. He sketched what he saw in dreams, creatures with eyes like his, bodies twisted in transition, forests lit by blood-red moons. He even began recording audio during the nights of transformation, hoping to capture a trace of himself left behind. It was his way of regaining control. And through this, he discovered something unexpected. The monster hadn't taken everything. It had left pieces. Painful pieces, yes, but also clarity, a sharpness in the mind, a deeper understanding of fear and mortality, an appreciation for quiet moments, for full bellies and warm lights. The beast had shown him how easily those things could be taken. "There's a weird kind of beauty in surviving something like that," he told me. "It doesn't make the pain less real, but it gives it meaning." Daniel now runs a blog under a pseudonym, It's hidden, buried behind layers of encryption, shared only through direct messages on those old forums. It's a safe space for others like him, where people share stories, rituals, and support. It's not a cure, but it's something. Because in the end, the legacy of a werewolf encounter isn't just blood and broken bones. It's the knowledge that you've seen yourself stripped bare, that you've stood on the edge of what it means to be human and didn't fall. The werewolf, for all its myth and mayhem, endures because it speaks to something ancient in us. The fear of the other, yes, but more deeply, the fear of the self. Not the polished version we present to the world. The hidden self. The animal. The rage, the hunger, the grief. The part we pretend doesn't exist until it howls from within. For Daniel, Harper, and so many others who've whispered their stories into the darkness, the terror wasn't just in the transformation. It was in the knowing. In realizing that what we consider monstrous might not be some ancient curse or fairy tale infection, but a raw, unfiltered truth about our own nature. We all wear masks. We all fear what happens when they're torn away. As I end this account, I find myself wondering, how many of us have felt that pull during a full moon? The restless pacing, the sudden, unexplained rage, the vivid dreams of running through forests, the cold air on our bare skin, the blood pounding in our ears like distant drums. Most brush it off, but some remember, and a few carry scars. If you're one of them, if you've ever felt the beast stir beneath your skin, I invite you to share your story. Not for answers, not for proof, but because there's power in speaking the unspeakable. There's strength in community, and perhaps healing in knowing you're not alone. Because in every shadow cast by the full moon, there may walk another, soul wrestling with their own darkness. And in that darkness, beyond the fangs and fur, there is resilience, there is hope, and sometimes, just sometimes, there is redemption. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness. Since the beginning of time, humanity has feared the darkness. We've cast shadows on the unknown, sculpting creatures out of our deepest anxieties, monsters that blur the lines between man and beast. Among them, none have captivated the human imagination quite like the werewolf. Tonight, we journey into the fog-shrouded past, to ancient lands and forgotten texts, to whispered tales and blood-soaked fields. We seek to unravel the truth behind one of our oldest nightmares, not through fantasy but through the lens of real-life cases, documented accounts that suggest the impossible may not be as far-fetched as it seems. But first, we must start at the beginning. The werewolf myth does not begin in Europe, as many assume. No, its roots stretch back further, deep into the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, where man first wrote myth into clay. There, gods with animalistic forms roamed the stories of the Sumerians and Akkadians, deities who were part wolf, part man, beings like the goddess Lilitu and the Epic of Gilgamesh, which speaks of wild men living with beasts outside civilization's grip. These were not the cursed howlers of modern lore. They were wild, powerful, connected to the earth, closer to nature, yet alien to society. Here we see the earliest seeds, the idea that man and beast are not separate, that under the right conditions they may become one. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Herodotus wrote of the Nuri, a tribe from Scythia said to transform into wolves for several days each year. The legend may have been born of ritual or misunderstood custom, but its presence in historical text gives us pause. These were not fairy tales. They were accounts. Later in Rome, we hear of Lycaon, a king cursed by Zeus for feeding human flesh to the gods. His punishment? Transformation into a wolf, a tale from which the term lycanthropy was born. But as we move through time, the werewolf becomes darker. more sinister. As Christianity spread through Europe, the church sought to purge pagan beliefs. Yet instead of erasing the werewolf myth, it reshaped it. Now the werewolf was no longer a wild man or nature spirit, it was a servant of the devil. In medieval Europe, fear ruled the land. Witches, demons, and beasts were blamed for everything from crop failure to disease, and so, the werewolf became a scapegoat, a human possessed, corrupted, or cursed. In France, tales of loup-garou, men who hunted children under the full moon, spread terror through the countryside. In Germany, Werewolf became associated with witchcraft, and in Eastern Europe, werewolves were often indistinguishable from vampires, cursed souls doomed to return from the dead, thirsty for blood. Meanwhile, in Norse mythology, the Ulfhednar were warriors who wore wolf pelts into battle, believed to channel the animal's ferocity. Here the transformation was embraced, even honored, a stark contrast to the Christian view, which framed it as sin. Even in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, tales of man-beasts persisted. In India, tiger men stalked the jungle. In Native American folklore, skinwalkers could take on the form of wolves and coyotes. And in Ethiopian lore, hyenas were feared as corpse-eaters and witch doctors. Each culture molded the werewolf myth to fit its own fears, its own truths. But beneath the variations lay a single primal question. What happens when the human mask slips away? By the 18th and 19th centuries, werewolves had slithered their way into fiction. No longer confined to oral tales or court documents, they became symbols of repressed desires, of rage, of the monstrous other lurking within. In literature, the werewolf evolved. In 1831, Captain Frederick Marryat published The Phantom Ship, one of the first novels to feature a werewolf as a tragic character. Later, in Guy Endor's 1933 novel The Werewolf of Paris, we see the creature as a tortured soul, a victim of urges he cannot control. Then came Hollywood. The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr., introduced audiences to the image we now know, a man cursed by a bite, doomed to kill under the full moon. The silver bullet, the pentagram, the fog-drenched moors, these became canonical. But more than that, the Wolfman gave us something deeper, a metaphor for the beast within us all. The werewolf was no longer just a monster. He was a man, a father, a friend, a lover, until the curse took hold. And as decades passed, the werewolf adapted. In the 1980s, we saw grotesque transformations in An American Werewolf in London and The Howling. In the 2000s, they fought vampires in Underworld and wooed teens in Twilight. Whether feral or romanticized, grotesque or tragic, the werewolf continued to shift, reflecting the evolving fears and fantasies of each generation. Yet, behind every special effect and Hollywood scream lies a more unsettling truth. Real people once believed werewolves walked among them, and some still do. In the next part of our journey, we will leave behind legend and enter the realm of documented history, where accusations turned deadly and hysteria swept through villages like wildfire. Real names, real victims, real fear. Join me as we step into the chilling annals of time. Legends are easy to dismiss, stories passed from mouth to ear shaped by centuries. But what happens when myth bleeds into history? When people are accused, judged, and executed not for what they are, but for what others believe them to be? Tonight, we examine those cases. Real names etched into records. Real deaths fueled by fear, superstition, and something darker. Between 1764 and 1767, the quiet French province of Gévaudan became a landscape of terror. Over 100 people, mostly women and children, were slaughtered by what villagers described as a giant beast with fangs like sabers and a tail as thick as a man's arm. Survivors spoke of a creature that moved like a man but killed like a monster. Some claimed it walked on two legs. Others swore they saw it wearing armor. The king himself, Louis XIV, sent professional hunters. Wolves were killed, trophies claimed. But the attacks continued. Panic spread like wildfire. One man, Jean Chastel, ultimately took credit for slaying the beast in 1767. He used a silver bullet. Sound familiar? Historians now suggest it was likely a large wolf or exotic animal perhaps, trained to attack, but others whisper of a man who dressed in hides and hunted the helpless. A killer who wore the face of a beast. The line between animal and man, in Gévaudan, it was razor thin. The werewolf hysteria didn't end in the woods. It found its way into courts, torture chambers, and execution grounds. In 16th century Europe, werewolf trials were as real and as deadly as witch hunts. Peter Stump, a German farmer from Bedburg, was one of the most infamous cases. In 1589, he was accused of being a werewolf. Tortured until he confessed, Stump claimed he had made a pact with the devil. He wore a magic belt, he said, that turned him into a wolf. His crimes, cannibalism, incest, murder, they tore him apart on the breaking wheel. His daughter and mistress were executed too. Historians today see this as a case of religious persecution, political scapegoating, or even mental illness. But to the people of Bedburg, a monster had been slain. Then there was Gilles Garnier, known as the Werewolf of Dole. He too confessed under torture to hunting and eating children. Found guilty in 1573, Garnier was burned at the stake. Such punishments were not unique. In Estonia, Thies of Kaltenbrunn claimed to be a good werewolf, one who battled witches in hell to protect crops. He was flogged and exiled. The idea of a man turning into a beast through curse, pact, or madness was not just superstition, it was law. But what if these people weren't monsters, just misunderstood? Let us consider clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychological condition in which individuals believe they can transform into animals. They growl, claw, even claim to see fur on their bodies. Often, these episodes are tied to schizophrenia, psychosis, or trauma. Could Peter Stump or Gilles Garnier have been suffering from such delusions? Could their confessions, extracted under unimaginable pain, have been the ravings of broken minds? And what about the villagers? In times of plague, famine, and war, people seek explanations, anything to make sense of suffering. And so, blame falls on the outsider, the strange, the mentally ill, the misunderstood. What we call mob hysteria, they call justice. Scene fades to black and white sketches of medieval trials. Wide-eyed, peasants, men tied to stakes, wolves in the margins of illuminated texts. History shows us again and again, the real monsters often wear human faces. But sometimes, just sometimes, the belief in something darker is enough to make it real. The werewolf trials were not fantasy. They were fear, systematized. Fear of the unknown, of the outsider, of the darkness within us all. And though we now view these cases through a lens of science and skepticism, they serve as a chilling reminder. Myth can kill, belief can burn, and the line between man and monster is often drawn in blood. Let's take a step back from the smoke and fire of the past and step into the light of science. Because while tales of transformation ignite the imagination, they rarely hold up to scrutiny under the microscope. Tonight we ask, is there any truth to the werewolf myth? Or are we chasing shadows? To begin, we confront a simple question. Can a human being physically transform into a wolf? From a scientific standpoint, the answer is unequivocally no. Our DNA, our skeletal structure, our internal organs are vastly different from those of canines. A transformation like the ones described in folklore would require instantaneous, radical reconfiguration of the human body. Bones stretching and reshaping, muscle mass changing, the nervous system rewiring in real time. Even with modern genetic engineering, such a metamorphosis is biologically impossible. There is no virus, no hormone, no magical belt that can rewrite the genome on command. And yet, people believed it. Some still do. So why? Sometimes, what appears to be a monster is simply misunderstood. Across history, several rare conditions may have fueled the werewolf legend. Hypertrichosis, often called werewolf syndrome, causes excessive hair growth all over the body. Those afflicted were sometimes exhibited in freak shows, their appearance used to reinforce tales of the beastman. Rabies, a viral disease spread by animal bites, can cause aggression, hallucinations, and a fear of water or bright lights. Sound familiar? Infected individuals may have acted erratically, even violently, giving rise to fears of transformation. Porphyria, a group of disorders affecting the skin and nervous system, may have contributed to myths as well. Symptoms include sensitivity to sunlight, facial disfigurement, and even red-colored teeth. But even more telling than biology is what lies in the mind. Let's return to clinical lycanthropy, a psychological disorder in which an individual believes they have transformed into an animal, most commonly a wolf. While rare cases have been recorded across the globe, sufferers may howl, crawl on all fours, and behave as if they are predators. Underlying conditions often include schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, or severe trauma. In 1985, a man was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in the Netherlands, claiming to be a werewolf. He exhibited violent behavior and spoke in growls. Under treatment, he later expressed remorse, fully believing he had become a beast. These are not fairy tales. These are real delusions fueled by stress, isolation, or past abuse, and often reinforced by cultural stories and personal belief systems. And in mass society, enter mass hysteria, the rapid spread of collective illusions. A single animal attack, a shadow in the woods, a misunderstood illness, each could ignite panic in isolated communities. Add superstition, religious dogma, and fear of the other, and a werewolf is born. When we unravel the werewolf, we don't find fur and fangs. We find fear, ignorance, and the human mind's fragile balance. Even today, the idea of the animal within persists. We describe people as predators. We warn of the beast inside. These are not just metaphors, they are deep evolutionary archetypes. So while we may scoff at silver bullets and full moons, the werewolf persists. Not in the woods, but in our culture, our stories, and our psyches. Perhaps the werewolf never needed to be real. Perhaps it was always meant to be a mirror for the animal inside us all. The werewolf may not walk among us, but it lives in our stories. From blood-soaked medieval scrolls to high-budget Hollywood blockbusters, this creature of the night has remained a cultural constant, its form evolving with the fears and fascinations of every generation. It adapts, it survives, and more importantly, it speaks to something primal. Let's explore why the werewolf never truly dies. The werewolf's earliest literary roots trace back to ancient Greece. In the Satyricon, Petronius tells of a man who transforms into a wolf under the moonlight. In Norse sagas, warriors known as berserkers were said to don wolf pelts and enter a trance-like rage in battle. And in Ovid's Metamorphoses, the story of King Lycaon, turned into a wolf for attempting to feed human flesh to the gods, gives us the very origin of the word lycanthropy. But it was the Middle Ages that solidified the werewolf as a figure of terror, aligned with Satan, feared by villagers, hunted by inquisitors. As society changed, so did the wolf. By the 19th and 20th centuries, the werewolf found new life in literature. In The Wolf Leader by Alexandre Dumas and The Werewolf by Clemens Hausmann, the creature was no longer just a monster. It became a symbol of internal struggle and moral ambiguity. Then came Hollywood. The 1941 classic, The Wolfman, cemented the archetype we know today: cursed man, full moon, involuntary transformation. It introduced ideas like silver bullets and the tragic anti-hero, doomed to become what he hates. In the decades that followed, the werewolf appeared in every genre imaginable. Horror, An American Werewolf in London, The Howling, comedy, Teen Wolf. What We Do in the Shadows, romance, Twilight, Blood and Chocolate, even animation and gaming, from Scooby-Doo to The Witcher to Skyrim. But why does it endure? Why does the image of the half-man, half-beast still grip us so tightly? The answer lies in the beast behind the metaphor. The werewolf is more than a monster. It is a symbol, a canvas for our darkest questions. What lurks beneath the civilized skin? What happens when reason loses control? Are we ever truly free of our animal instincts? In the werewolf, we find a reflection of our rage, our lust, our fears of becoming unrecognizable to ourselves. It is the ultimate duality: man and monster, human and predator, guilt and release. And as society evolves, so too does the werewolf's purpose. In modern times, the creature often stands in for the outcast, a misunderstood being battling something within. Werewolves in today's media are not always villains. Sometimes they're heroes, protectors, victims. We no longer burn them. We relate to them. Through war, plague, isolation, and anxiety, the werewolf has followed us, changing shape, voice, and purpose. It's not the monster we fear. It's the reminder that we too can change. The werewolf, myth, monster, metaphor. A creature that walks the edge between man and beast, civilization and chaos, sanity and madness. We've traveled through ancient legends and dark forests of the past. We've examined real cases, some tragic, some terrifying. We've peeled back the layers of biology and the folds of the mind. We've seen how stories shape our world. But now we ask, what does it all mean? At its core, the werewolf is a reflection, not of nature, but of us. We invented the creature to explain what we didn't understand. Violent crimes, sudden illness, unexplainable urges. The werewolf became the scapegoat for the unexplainable. But deeper still, it represents our most primal fear, losing control of our bodies, of our thoughts, of our place in society. We see the werewolf as a warning sign, a dark mirror that, buried beneath the suit, the smile, the daily routine, there is something older, hungrier. And yet, we are drawn to it because sometimes we want to let it out. Today, we don't burn witches or hunt beasts by moonlight, but we still face fear, still create scapegoats, still wrestle with duality. The werewolf myth survives because it adapts to new realities. In a world of stress and societal pressure, the idea of transformation, of shedding constraints if only for a night, can feel liberating, cathartic, even empowering. But even in fiction, freedom comes at a price. The werewolf reminds us every instinct has consequences. Every desire, its shadow. That's the true horror and the true brilliance of the myth. There's something else too. Something quieter, more ancient. The werewolf myth isn't just about fear of animals. It's about our connection to them. The wolf is not only predator, it is kin. It symbolizes loyalty, pack bonds, survival, strength. In werewolf stories, we see both the threat of losing our humanity and the temptation of returning to nature. In a modern world where we are often disconnected from the wild, the werewolf becomes a symbol of reconnection, even if it's terrifying. The werewolf may not be real. Not in the way old villagers feared, not in the silver bullet kind of way. But myths are not lies. They are symbols, containers of truth, echoes of what we feel but cannot say. And in that sense, werewolves are as real as grief, as rage, as wonder. They teach us about duality, self-control, and the lines we draw between ourselves and the wild. They remind us that every human story is, in some small way, a struggle against the beast within. So, whether you believe the old stories or not, remember this. The werewolf's greatest strength was never its claws. It was its ability to survive, inside us all. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness. They say the Carpathians have a voice. Not the kind that speaks in words, but something older. An ancient murmur that rides on the wind, weaves through the pines, and lingers just long enough to make you wonder if you ever heard it at all. To the east beyond, where the paved roads surrender to gravel and gravel to mud, lies a place that no modern map dares mark. Vladini, a village cradled in fog, guarded by thickets of dead trees and cloaked in the kind of silence that gnaws at the edges of sanity. Travelers do not come here by accident. Roads bend strangely near the forest line. GPS signals stutter and compasses spin. It is as if the land itself conspires to keep the village hidden, and for good reason. Once, long ago, people spoke the name Vladini aloud. Now it exists only in the footnotes of half-burnt texts, in the margins of old monk manuscripts, and in the tales told by drunk old men who swear they saw things in their youth, things that watched them from behind trees, never blinking, never breathing. The story begins not with a scream or a chase, but with a stillness. It was mid-October when the wind first changed. Locals in neighboring towns, those few who still dared to live near the perimeter, noticed that animals were growing skittish. Dogs barked at nothing. Horses refused to ride north. Crows flew in low circles and vanished all at once. But in Vladini, where time was slower and people older, the signs were not ignored. Wooden shutters were bolted at dusk. Garlic hung in heavy rotting braids from doorframes. Crosses etched into stone were scrubbed clean and recarved deeper. And always, the whisper of Varcolac passed between trembling lips. Most had forgotten the shape of the word, but the fear that had never left. The narrator does not follow a hero, not this time. There are no knights, no hunters, no silver bullets polished in secret drawers. There is only the land, the curse, and the final witness, a nameless traveler, curious and cursed, who arrived in search of stories and found something older than myth, something that waited to be remembered. It was late evening when he arrived. The sun hung low like a bleeding wound in the sky, casting long, reaching shadows across the trees. His boots sank into wet leaves, muffling each step. The air smelled of moss, rot, and old things best left buried. Ahead, the forest opened to reveal the village, a scattering of homes sagging under the weight of age, roofs blanketed in moss and windows dark as closed eyes. No smoke rose from chimneys, no laughter echoed between the homes, only the steady creak of a lone wooden sign that read, Vladini, swaying back and forth in the wind. Even though there was no wind at all, the traveler stopped. Something moved behind the trees, too tall for a man, too smooth for a bear, but when he turned, there was only stillness, always stillness. Vladini was not abandoned, but it might as well have been. The traveler stepped past the threshold marked by that ancient, creaking sign and felt the air grow heavier. Not colder, not darker, just thicker, as if walking through water or grief. His presence stirred nothing. No dogs barked, no doors cracked open to peek. The houses simply watched him, blind and breathless. He wandered the main path, its stones uneven and slick with moss, winding between crooked buildings with bowed walls and shutters nailed shut. Some roofs had caved in entirely, revealing the hollow ribs of the homes beneath. But there were signs of life, faint ones. On a windowsill, a child's doll sat half drowned in rainwater. At the chapel's edge, fresh wax pooled beneath a candle that hadn't burned long ago. Someone had been here. Someone was still here, but they were hiding. The traveler didn't call out. Perhaps instinct kept his voice buried. The silence in Vladini didn't want to be disturbed, and he was beginning to understand why. As he approached the heart of the village, he saw the well, the kind built long before concrete, when stone, was laid by hand and sealed with animal blood. Vines now crawled up its sides. Something had been scratched into the stones, runes, crosses, symbols not found in any church doctrine. They weren't for worship, they were for warning. Around the earth was dead. Grass did not grow there, no insects danced above it. Just the faint scent of copper in the wind, like blood turned old. The traveler leaned close, peering into the mouth of the well. He could not see the bottom. No echo returned his breath. Just a long, patient darkness that looked back at him and blinked. He stepped away quickly, heart thudding in his chest. To the west of the square, an ancient chapel hunched like a dying man. Its steeple had collapsed long ago, and its stone steps were cracked and overgrown. He pushed open the door, surprised to find it unbarred, and stepped into dust, decay, and something else, something wrong. Inside, the pews were scattered, as if people had fled in haste. The altar had been defaced, its crucifix split down the middle, and behind it, scratched into the wall, a single word appeared over and over again. Varcolac. Not carved by knife, not burned, scratched by claw. A traveler turned to leave, but paused. On the floor lay a book, its cover leather-bound and swollen with dampness. He knelt and opened it. Not a Bible, but a journal, dated over 50 years ago. Pages filled with sketches, of wolves, of moons, of twisted, mangled bodies. No names. Only one recurring phrase. It lives beneath us. The well is not a well. It is a throat, and it is hungry. The wind howled through the broken rafters then, and the candle near the altar flickered to life. But there was no one there to light it. Something had noticed him, and something had woken up. He left the chapel with the journal pressed tight beneath his coat. heart hammering with the uncomfortable certainty that he was no longer alone. The wind had changed. It no longer whistled, it hummed, low and rhythmic, like breath through hollow bone. The sky was fading now, stained purple and gray, as dusk bled slowly into the valley. Shadows gathered not just from the angle of the sun, but from the forest itself, as if the trees had exhaled something darker into the world. He walked, not aimlessly. His feet were drawn toward the tree line at the village's edge, where the path curved into a tunnel of pines so densely packed they swallowed the light. The locals, had they still spoken, would have warned him of that path. The old forest was the spine of the curse, and it did not welcome strangers. Beneath the canopy, the air was colder, heavy with moisture and memory. Moss clung to tree trunks like flayed skin. Fungi bloomed in grotesque shapes along the roots, some pulsing faintly like something half alive. The journal had mentioned this place, described a clearing deep within the trees, where rituals had once been held, sacrifices offered, not in worship but in fear. No coordinates were listed, no trail marked, just one line, circled in thick black ink, where the trees bow inward and no birds sing. It waits. He found that place far sooner than he expected. The forest opened without warning like a throat-swallowing light. Trees leaned inward, unnaturally bent, their branches gnarled and tangled like grasping fingers. The clearing was small, circular and wrong, the ground too level, the soil too dry. And in the center, surrounded by a crude ring of stones, was something that didn't belong, a carcass. No, what remained of one. The body of a stag, its antlers broken, its throat torn. But it wasn't fresh. The wound was black, charred at the edges, as though it had not been bitten but burned from the inside out. And yet no smell of rot, no insects, no decay. It looked preserved, a ritual death. Beneath the stag, partially buried in the dirt, was a symbol carved in stone, too large for one man to lift. It depicted a wolf's head, its jaw open, swallowing the moon. The traveler didn't speak, but something in him screamed. Every instinct urged him to run, but he stood there silent and frozen as the trees began to creak, not with wind but with movement. Around the clearing, the forest shifted. Trees didn't sway, they shivered. Something moved between them, fast, low to the ground, circling. Not footsteps, not paws. Something softer, quieter, longer. He turned but saw nothing. Only shadows that lingered too long. Only branches that bent toward him like supplicants. Then came the sound. A growl, not deep, not guttural, but distant, like thunder heard through a tunnel. And layered beneath it, something worse, the sound of breathing. Heavy, wet, and human. He backed away, eyes wide, every hair on his body prickling with ancestral fear. And then he saw them, two eyes wide and yellow, low in the dark, watching from the tree line. They did not blink. The traveler turned and ran. He did not look back. He did not stop running until the clearing was a memory and the forest closed behind him like a tomb sealing shut. His breath came ragged, tearing at his chest like claws. Branches whipped past his face. Roots grasped at his ankles, but the trees, for all their menace, no longer seemed the greatest danger. Not after what he'd seen watching him from the dark. The traveler broke from the tree line just as the last light drained from the sky. Night in Vladini was not like night elsewhere. It didn't fall. It rose, climbing from the earth itself, thick and impenetrable, until even the stars were choked from view. The village greeted him with silence, but it was no longer still. He could feel it now. Something pulsing beneath the ground. The houses seemed to lean closer, their broken windows yawning wider, as if bracing for something long overdue. He passed the well again. The stones glistened wet now, though no rain had fallen. The scent of iron was stronger. The chapel door hung open, swaying gently on its hinges, though there was no wind. Inside, the candle still burned, but now dozens more surrounded it, freshly lit, their flames steady and tall. Someone, or something, had prepared a vigil. On the altar, the journal lay open to a page he hadn't seen before. A final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting that pressed deep into the parchment. The Varcolac is not a beast, it is a memory that eats. It is not the cursed, it is the curse itself. We are its skin, its hosts, its mouths. To bleed is to call it, to remember is to feed it. I should not have written this. Beneath the words, a smear of blood, dried, human. The traveler stepped back from the altar as the floor groaned beneath his boots. The sound wasn't age, it was breath, rising from below. The chapel trembled slightly, just enough to knock dust from the rafters. Then the bells began to ring, not from the chapel, its steeple had collapsed, but from somewhere deeper in the village. A slow, deliberate toll, as though marking time for a procession that no longer marched. The ground pulsed again, and then the screaming started. Not words, not human, just a single, soul-shredding howl that split the night in two. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from beneath, above, within, a kind of sound that didn't echo but spread, worming into the marrow. The traveler ran once more, guided only by instinct and terror. He no longer thought of escape, only survival. But even that felt like blasphemy in this place, at the edge of the village. He came upon something new, a graveyard he hadn't seen before, small, overgrown, swallowed by vines. Every headstone was broken, defaced or clawed. At its center stood a stone monolith, taller than a man, etched with a symbol he recognized, the wolf's jaw, moon in its throat. But something had changed. The stone was cracked, leading a thick black ichor that hissed where it touched the soil. He approached, drawn as if by magnetism, unable to look away. And then he saw them, figures, dozens, maybe more, rising from the ground, from the shadows, from the hollows between trees, not alive, not dead, twisted remnants of human shape, elongated limbs, hollow chests, jaws stretched too wide, eyes burning yellow in sockets too deep. They did not move toward him. They only watched. And then they knelt, every single one in unison, not to him, but to something behind him. He turned. He should not have turned. It stood beneath the trees where the shadows were thickest and the earth seemed unwilling to support its weight. The Varcolac, not a beast as the old tales whispered, not fur and fang. What stood before him was worse, something that remembered being human. Its shape was not fixed. It rippled, bones stretching, organs folding inward. A mimicry of man and wolf, and something older, smoother, more insect than mammal. Its flesh shimmered like wet leather. Its mouth, there were too many teeth. Too many jaws nested inside one another, like a lantern folded inward. And its eyes, they were not eyes, they were mirrors. The traveler looked into them and saw himself, but not just himself. He saw all who had come before, the priests who'd buried the dead without rites, the villagers who'd offered blood to the stones, the child who'd been taken in the fog. He saw each soul consumed, remembered only through pain, because the Varcolac was not a hunter. It was a memory made flesh. It fed not on bodies, but on legacy, on belief, on fear. It existed only because people had believed it did. And now, through curiosity and arrogance, he had added his own piece to its myth, and that was enough. The creature stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive. It did not need to chase. It had already won, because the traveler now knew. The moment he crossed into Vladeni, he had ceased being a man. He had become a witness. And the Varcolac did not kill its witnesses, it hollowed them. The figures around him, the kneeling ones, began to sway, mouths open in silent reverence. Their eyes were glass, empty, glowing faintly, as if a candle burned behind the skull. They were not possessed. They were preserved, shells that had seen too much and remembered too deeply. The traveler fell to his knees. He felt the weight of centuries pressing into his bones. His heartbeat slowed, his breath thickened. Words filled. His mind, not spoken but engraved like scars into thought. You came to know the curse. Now you are part of it. The Varcolac opened its maw, not to bite, to speak, and though no sound came, the meaning was clear. You will carry me. The forest shuddered, the ground cracked, roots erupted upward, wrapping around the traveler's limbs. They did not tear. They merged, sliding beneath skin, weaving through muscle, filling his body like rivers flooding stone. And in that moment, he understood. Vladeni had no survivors, only successors. They say the mountains remember, and sometimes late at night when the fog rolls thick across the valleys of Transylvania, a traveler may arrive at a village that does not exist on any map. And when he returns, if he returns, he carries with him stories, stories that spread, stories that feed, and the curse lives on. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness. They say the beast walks among us, that beneath flesh and civility lies something primal, something ancient, something hungry. We call them werewolves, but names do little justice to what they truly are. This is a descent into the mind of the monster. Let us begin with the story, the legend, a brief history of werewolf mythology. The roots of the werewolf myth stretch deep into the soils of ancient civilization. The earliest records whisper from Greece, where the legend of King Lycaon unfolds. In a tale of blasphemy and punishment, Lycaon was transformed into a wolf by Zeus himself, cursed for his attempt to feed human flesh to a god. From this tale, the very word lycanthropy, the transformation from man to wolf, was born. But the Greeks were not alone in their terror. Norse sagas spoke of berserkers, warriors donning wolf pelts, believed to channel the fury of wolves in battle. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, tales grew darker. The werewolf became not a symbol of honor or punishment, but a pariah, a creature of the woods, a man cursed, roaming beneath the full moon, bloodied and wild. In France, the loup-garou haunted village outskirts. In Germany, werewolves were burned at the stake, often confused with witches. Accusations flew freely in times of plague and famine. The werewolf became an explanation for the unexplainable, a scapegoat, a monster conjured to cope with fear. But myths evolve. Examining the werewolf in popular culture by the 20th century, the werewolf had clawed its way onto the silver screen. 1941's The Wolfman introduced a tragic, tormented creature, Larry Talbot, bitten and cursed to transform under the full moon. It wasn't just gore that sold the tale. It was grief, the pain of becoming something you cannot control. As decades passed, the werewolf danced between horror and fantasy. In An American Werewolf in London, the transformation was grotesque, visceral, unforgettable. Teen Wolf reimagined the creature as a metaphor for adolescent change. More recently, the werewolf entered romantic territory, sharing screen time with vampires and witches in Twilight and the Vampire Diaries. But regardless of era or tone, one theme endures: the duality, man and monster, victim and predator, self and other. Exploring the psychology behind the werewolf myth. Why does the werewolf captivate us? Why does this myth endure? Some psychologists suggest lycanthropy represents the loss of self-control, a surrender to urges buried beneath layers of social conditioning. The werewolf is an avatar for rage, lust, addiction, all-consuming emotions we try, often in vain, to keep buried. It is also the fear of transformation, of becoming someone or something we no longer recognize, a metaphor for madness, for illness, for the beast within. Freud might have seen the werewolf as the id, unleashed, primal, instinctual, driven by desire without regard for morality. Jung, on the other hand, may have seen it as the shadow self, the parts of us we deny, yet must one day confront. And in every culture, the wolf has remained a powerful totem, revered, feared, wild. To fuse man and wolf is to blur the line between civilization and nature, between predator and prey. It is that line we will continue to walk as we turn the page and peer deeper into the darkness. What lies beneath the fur and fangs? What animates the creature when the moon reaches its zenith and humanity fades into instinct? To understand the werewolf, we must look beyond the myth. We must observe the behavior of the beast. Physiological changes. The transformation is the most well-known aspect of lycanthropy and the most horrifying. Eyewitness accounts, often dismissed as fevered hallucinations, describe the change as violent. Bones break and reknit, limbs elongate, fingernails blacken into claws, teeth erupt into jagged points. The skin stretches, tearing and reforming until fur sprouts from every pore. 1 second, and the next, monster. Height and mass increase exponentially. Musculature becomes dense, compact, capable of feats of strength no human should achieve. Reports tell of werewolves leaping 15 feet into the air, rending doors from hinges, smashing through barricades meant to hold vehicles at bay. Their senses are heightened, smell most of all. Some theorize a werewolf can detect a drop of blood in a pool of water. Others believe they can follow a scent trail for miles, even days after it's gone cold. Their eyes change too. Some glow amber, others red, but all share a terrifying clarity, an intensity that sees beyond flesh, beyond masks, straight into fear. Behavioral patterns. The classic behaviors are well documented, though often romanticized. Howling at the moon is not simply theatrical. It is communication, a territorial cry, a warning, a call to others of its kind. Hunting behavior is erratic, yet purposeful. The werewolf often favors raw meat, especially that of large prey, deer, cattle, humans. There are reports of werewolves dragging their kills into the woods, feasting under the moonlight with disturbing precision. They do not kill for sport, but survival or compulsion. Aggression spikes during the full moon, a behavior consistent across centuries of lore. Some theorize the moon's gravitational pull may trigger biological responses, akin to tidal changes or hormonal shifts. Others believe it's psychological, a symbolic unleashing of the darker self. Werewolves, even in human form, may display subtle behaviors, avoidance of moonlight, sudden bursts of anger, a tendency to isolate. These are not myths, they are patterns. Emotional motivations behind the teeth lies something unexpected. Emotion. Many believe the werewolf is devoid of humanity during its transformation, but that is not always the case. There are those who remember, those who recall flashes of their nocturnal rampages, the screams, the blood, the chase, and they are left with overwhelming guilt and rage, not at others, but at themselves. Anger is often a trigger. So is fear, jealousy, sorrow. These heightened emotions may serve as the fuel that ignites the transformation. The more emotionally unstable the individual, the more frequently they shift, and the more violent the result. Others describe the sensation as being possessed yet fully aware, their consciousness buried beneath a tidal wave of instinct. They watch as their hands, now claws, commit unspeakable acts. Some even relish it. For those who feel powerless in their daily lives, the transformation offers strength, freedom, release. The monster becomes a mask they wear proudly, a liberation from weakness. It is here that the true horror resides, not in the killing, not in the fur, but in the part of them that does not want to be cured, that chooses the beast. They walk among us, at school, at work, at home. Werewolves are not always monsters in the woods. Sometimes they wear familiar faces. Sometimes they're the ones you trust most. But the signs are there, if you know how to look. Observing the signs, the first indicators are often physical, subtle shifts that defy explanation. Unusual strength is one. Individuals who display momentary feats of near superhuman power, such as lifting objects too heavy for their size, or surviving injuries that would incapacitate others. It's written off as adrenaline or luck, but it isn't. Eyes that flash, with unnatural color and certain lighting. Hair growth that thickens seemingly overnight, even over unusual parts of the body. Shoulders, spine, hands, and then there's the skin, tougher, almost resistant to wounds. Bruises fade quickly. Cuts heal within hours. Some report an odd smell, earthy, musky, vaguely metallic, clinging to suspected werewolves, especially as the full moon nears. Others speak of voices that shift pitch in odd moments, breathing that becomes labored without effort. But most chilling are the behaviors, the way they sometimes seem too alert, too still, as if always listening for a sound no one else can hear. They may disappear during full moons, or suffer unexplained blackouts and memory lapses. You might catch them staring into the distance, jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, like they smell something wrong in the air. They might become easily agitated, reacting violently to minor frustrations, or they may go eerily quiet, withdrawn, tense, their skin clammy under sweat that smells like blood and dirt. You'll want to tell yourself it's nothing, but you'll feel it. The part of you that still understands fear will know. Recognizing the triggers. If you're watching someone you suspect, pay attention to the triggers. The full moon is the most infamous, and with good reason. It acts as both a catalyst and a countdown. Tensions rise in the days leading up to it. The individual may become sleep-deprived, irritable, restless. By the night of the full moon, they often vanish, claiming illness, a sudden trip, or silence altogether. Exposure to moonlight, especially unfiltered, may provoke unease or physical discomfort. Some report transformations not just under full moons but in the presence of emotional triggers. Extreme rage, grief, panic, or terror. Stress acts as a storm cloud. The werewolf lies beneath, waiting for the lightning. Certain stimuli can also act as precursors. Loud howls in the distance may make the individual freeze or react unpredictably. The scent of blood can trigger visible changes, sharpening of posture, dilation of pupils, clenched jaws. And don't dismiss the importance of instinct. Animals react first. Dogs growl, cats flee. Even birds may avoid landing near the afflicted. Nature knows what we try to forget, the importance of caution. If you suspect someone is a werewolf, do not confront them. They may not even be aware of what they are. Or worse, they may be fully aware and simply waiting. Avoid being alone with the individual during high-risk periods. Do not attempt to trap or challenge them. Do not taunt. The line between human and monster is fragile, and once crossed, there is no going back. Keep your distance. Keep your suspicion quiet. And most importantly, prepare. Because if you're right, if the signs were real, then the next full moon may not just reveal the truth. It may come for you. Let's make something clear from the start. If you're face to face with a werewolf, you're already in danger. But danger isn't the same as death. Not if you remember the rules, not if you stay calm, and not if you act like prey that knows how to survive. Stay calm and avoid confrontation. The worst thing you can do in the presence of a werewolf is panic. Fear triggers instinct, and instinct is what drives the beast to kill. If you run, it will chase you. If you scream, it will silence. You instead stay calm. Control your breathing, avoid sudden movements. Think of the werewolf not as a monster but a predator, one that responds to challenge and weakness in equal measure. Do not lock eyes. Do not raise your voice. Speak softly, if at all. Let it smell that you are not a threat. Let it sense your caution, your respect. Some survivors report that maintaining eye contact too long is perceived as aggression. Others say avoiding eye contact altogether makes you appear vulnerable. The safest approach? Brief glances and focus on body language. This is not a negotiation. It's survival. Maintain a safe distance. Werewolves are fast. Faster than you can imagine, but they still need space to strike. Stay back. Put something between you and it. Tree, a car, a doorway, anything that breaks line of sight or slows movement. Elevation helps, so does narrow terrain. Do not corner yourself, but do limit its options. Remember, in beast form, it doesn't think like a human. It won't negotiate, it won't hesitate, but it will evaluate. If you're not easy prey, it may look elsewhere. In rural areas, get indoors. Lock all entry points. Silver is said to repel them, though reliable confirmation is scarce. What is consistent, however, is that werewolves are reluctant to attack large groups. There is safety in numbers, and noise, bright lights, alarms, fire, can confuse or agitate them, enough to make an escape, but only if you're lucky. Seek professional help. This is not a problem for local law enforcement. You cannot shoot your way out of a werewolf encounter. Not with bullets made of lead and certainty. If you survive the night, if you have reason to believe someone around you is a werewolf, contact experts, cryptozoologists, occult specialists, hunters if such people still exist in your part of the world. Yes, the authorities will dismiss you. You may be laughed out of every room, but those who believe, those who know, will find you. There are networks, quiet ones, hidden forums, obscure phone numbers and encrypted inboxes. They don't advertise, but they listen. Tell them what you saw. Provide details. Be honest. Be thorough. They may not be able to stop the next transformation, but they might know how to slow it. And sometimes that's enough. The myth endures. From ancient fireside tales to streaming platforms and virtual realities, the werewolf walks with us, evolving, adapting, surviving. But why? What is it about this creature that refuses to die? The werewolf in modern media. Today's werewolf is not the same beast who stalked the Black Forest or prowled Victorian London. Modern media has remade the monster 100 times over. In video games like The Order, 1886 or Bloodborne, werewolves are savage, demonic monsters built for blood and chaos. In films like Underworld, they become warriors, tactical, intelligent, deadly. Television series like Teen Wolf blend horror with heroism, showing the lycanthrope not only as predator, but protector. Even literature continues to reinvent the myth, from gritty reimaginings in The Last Werewolf to romantic entanglements in Twilight. Each portrayal, each variation reflects something deeply human, a fear, a fantasy, a fracture in our psyche. The werewolf has become a mirror. Sometimes we see a monster in it. Sometimes we see ourselves, exploring the potential for real-world connection. There are those who believe the werewolf myth is not entirely fiction. Science, after all, has blurred lines once thought impassable. Genetic mutations can cause excessive hair growth, fanged teeth, sensitivity to light, and irregular circadian rhythms. Hypertrichosis, known as werewolf syndrome, has been documented throughout history. Then there are the psychological aspects. Clinical lycanthropy is a rare psychiatric condition in which the afflicted believe they are turning into animals, often wolves. The episodes are often triggered by trauma, psychosis, or extreme stress. To the sufferer, the transformation feels real, and sometimes that belief is enough to alter behavior in terrifying ways. There's also growing research into sleep disorders, such as parasomnia and REM sleep behavior disorder, which can cause people to act out violent dreams, sometimes with no memory of it. Put simply, monsters may not have fur and claws, but they do walk among us. The enduring power of the werewolf. Werewolf myth survives because we still don't fully understand ourselves. We are creatures of instinct wrapped in rationality. We fight urges with laws. We bury our darker thoughts beneath civility. But the beast never truly dies. It waits. The werewolf reminds us of what we're capable of, the rage we suppress, the hunger we deny, the freedom we both fear and crave. And in an age of technology, surveillance, and conformity, the myth of transformation, the idea that you can become something else under just the right conditions, remains tantalizing, terrifying, timeless. So, the next time you hear a howl in the night, the next time you see something move just out of the corner of your eye, the next time you wonder about the person who never seems quite right, remember, it's not always myth. Sometimes the beast is real. Sometimes it's already looking back at you. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video, It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below, and if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.